Hi. All right. So this week we're going to be going through three functions or three skills. Uh, you're going to notice that this week is different than the other weeks. There is no chapter in the textbook. We the instructions in Fanshawe Online take you through three components in the textbook called more skills. And just as a point on those, every chapter in your textbook has the 10 skills that are being covered that week. But at the end of each chapter, there's something called more skills. And those are covering off things that weren't covered in the core part of the text, but are still skills that you may or may not want to take advantage of using Excel. So this week we're going to be covering three of those skills. Two of those skills: define, goal seek, solver, and define names. Three of those skills. But there are other skills. So if you're looking for something in Excel and it's not in the 10 skills that we've taken, go to the index, take a look it up, look for it. It'll be in one of the more skills, and you'll have all the same ability to practice and work through those as you will. Now, in the past, what I have done here is I've gone through the three skills: the define names, the goal seek, and the solver, independent of the grader assignment. However, the grader assignment this week is a custom grader assignment. It was written by me, and it is one that is highly dependent on logic. And logic is something that you really need to kind of work through on it. So this 1 week, what we will do in the video and in instruction in class is actually work through the grader assignment itself. So rather than download a file from Fanshawe Online and work through it in the instruction and then go and do the grader yourself, we're actually going to work through the grader together. So I recommend that you put this on hold right now, fire up my IT Lab, and download the instructions and the download file from my IT Lab, so that you can work along with us or with me as I go through the actual assignment. So put us on hold, open it back up again when you have the file available to you in my IT Lab. Okay, so in this particular file, basically what we are doing is we are going to answer questions from staff on what their pension will be worth when they retire. So to calculate when they retire, we're going to go through a number of different things. So what we're going to be looking at here is we're going to first look at define names. We're going to give names to cells and ranges of cells. We're going to use VLOOKUP to fill in all of those fields that you see on the screen there: last name, first name, department, and so on. We are going to then use the future value calculation to calculate the value of their pension at the end of this term. So in this situation, what you have is kind of a general purpose spreadsheet that you can use for any employee when they come in and ask you the question. What they will do is they will give you their employee ID. Normally you would actually go out to a file somewhere and pick up their gross pay. So their gross monthly pay, or whatever, however we calculate. We're going to treat this as a monthly. So they would say, you would go, once they gave you the employee ID, you would go out to your payroll file and find out what their pay is. We don't have that ability, so we're actually going to type in the pay amount. The interest rate is whatever interest rate you are assuming is going to be in play for the period of their pension. And this is very common. Anytime you're going to be taking a look at the value of a pension down the road, you have to assume a certain interest rate. It used to be 10%. Nowadays it's more like 4%, but whatever. So the four fields you see here that are colored in peach are the fields that you are going to enter. All the other fields that you see on the screen here are going to be calculated by you. So all we're going to do is enter the employee ID. We're going to use the lookup table to find that employee ID, and then we're going to use VLOOKUP to fill in all of these fields. We're going to calculate their age. We're going to calculate their service. We're going to calculate their retirement date. We're going to calculate the months till retirement, and we are going to calculate their pension contribution. Okay, so a number of different things, a number of different moving parts here, but in essence, all you would normally do in an environment here is enter in their employee ID and their current interest rate and voluntary pension contribution if they are making any, and we'll come to that in a minute. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is define name. Every cell in your spreadsheet has by default a name, and that's shown up here in the name box, and it's normally just the row and the column. So right now I'm on cell B4, now I'm on cell B5, B6, B7, etc. Now you can create your own names for cells. So I could go on to a cell. I'm actually going to open a blank worksheet here just so we can kind of work through it. So here you can see the worksheet, and I'm going to enter a thing here. I'm going to say what are we going to call it here? Pay, income tax, health cost, and that's enough. So I'm going to put in here their pay amount and their income tax and how much money they're going to be paying on their health insurance to calculate their net pay. Okay, so we'll put in a value here of $3,000. We'll say we're going to deduct $500 for income tax, $125 for health insurance. So my net pay is going to be equal to my gross pay minus my income tax minus my health tax. So at the end of the day, this employee is taking home $2,375. Now, what I can do is I can use names for cells. So I'm going to call this cell pay. And to name a cell, you have a number of ways you can do that. I could simply click on the cell, go up to the name box, and type in what I'm going to call it. So I'll call this one pay. And on this one, a second way to do it is to go up to the Formulas tab, where you've got this thing called Name Manager, and I can say Define Name, and I can give it a name. Now in this case, it's automatically picked up the heading above it, Income Tax, which is fine, so we'll call it that. This one here, we can do the same thing. I can click on Health, Define Name, and I can call that one Health. It's already created that for me. And I can call this one Net Pay. Okay, so now this cell, so if you take a look at the name box, right now this cell down here is cell D8, but now if I click on the name box, this cell is now called Pay, this cell is now called Income Tax, this cell is now called Health, and this cell is now called Net Pay. So one of the values of defining a cell name is that not only does it define the name, you can use the actual name in your formulas as opposed to the cell addresses. So I can say here that my net pay is equal to my pay minus income tax minus health. So now my formula is more English language. So that's one of the values of a name. I'm going to go up here to the Name Manager, and so there's the cells that I created. I'm going to click on Edit just so you can see what it shows here. Notice down here at the bottom it says it refers to the sheet name and the cell address as an absolute reference. So one of the other values of using a defined name is that by default a defined name is an absolute reference. So I no longer have to hit $signs for my formulas to make that an absolute reference. Okay. All right. Now there is another way. I'm going to actually delete all of these. I don't know if I can delete them all at once. Yeah, I can. Okay. So one of the other ways that you can do it, and again my formula is no good anymore, another way that you can define names is you can highlight a range. So in this case I'm highlighting the headings and the cells below, and on Define Name in the Formulas tab in the Define Names group I can click on Create from Selection, and in this case it says create from the top row, So what this will do is it will name each cell with the heading above it. So cell E5 is going to be called pay, cell F5 is going to become income tax, G5 is going to become health, and H5 is going to become net pay. So again, if I click here, you can see. Now notice that on the income tax that it actually puts an underscore instead of a space. Names cannot have spaces in them. So you either use an underscore or you don't put a space in or something, but some way to identify. And now again, I could go and do my formula, equals pay minus income tax minus health, and I get my formula. Okay, so that's defining names. Pretty straightforward, but the big value for us is that a defined name by default is an absolute reference, and that's going to become important to us in a minute. All right, so I'm going to delete this worksheet, and I'm going to go back to my input worksheet. So in here, so I'm starting on skill number 2 in the in your instructions. So you should have your instructions opened at this point in time as we work through the greater assignment. So you're going to see here that I have a file called lookup. And this is, you can see that I have a number of employees, so 100 employees. And each employee has a employee ID, which is just a numerical number 1 through 100. Then they have their first name, their last name, their phone number, their department, the date they were hired, their street address, their city, their state, their zip code, their home phone number, their birth date, their current pension value, and which pension plan they belong in. Okay, so this is, think of this as your employee table. All right, so what we're going to be looking at, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using their employee ID to go out and pick up all of these other pieces of information that we want to deal with. One of the things I want to talk about, well, we'll come back to dates in a minute. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to name a table, and the table I'm going to name is the employee table. So I'm going to start on cell A2. I'm going to hold my shift key down, or I can just click and drag, and I'm going to select all the cells down to the very bottom. So make sure that you're selecting all the way from column A over to column N, and from A2 down to the very bottom. So when you're setting up a table for VLOOKUP, you do not include the headings, because what you're doing is when you're looking at the data, not the headings themselves. Okay. Once I have done that, I'm going to go up to the name box, and I'm going to call this employee lookup. And I hit enter. Or I could have gone up here to the define name, and I could have called it employee lookup here. Okay, so now I've defined my first name. I'm going to do a second one for this. This is your pension plans. So if you look at the employees, so let's take a look at Candy Fenney. Candy Fenney belongs to the council pension plan. So her rate of pay, her contributions for her pension is going to be 25 or 15%. This person down here belongs to CAW. So that person's pension or contribution is 8%. And here's somebody that belongs to OMERS, and here's somebody who's in the salary pension plan, and so on. So depending on the employee, whatever pension plan they're in, we're going to use a different calculation to calculate their pension. So I'm going to create another name table. So I'm going to select the data, not including the headings. I'm going to go up to define name this time, and I'm going to call this one pension plan lookup. So pension underscore plan underscore lookup, and I'm going to click OK. Alright, so if I look at my name manager, you can see that, I'll get rid of all these junky ones that I had before. These are just the carryovers from before, from the example. So now you can see that I have two lookups. I have employee lookup and I have pension plan lookup. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my input worksheet, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, so that was skill number 2. And skill number 3 says, looking at the input, you'll note that there are 4 fields with a peach background using employee ID to find data, and so on and so forth. To make our formulas more understanding, we use create from selection in the define name group. So in effect, what we want to do is I want to call this cell employee ID. I want to call this cell gross pay. So I want to call B6 current interest rate, and I want to call B7 voluntary pension contribution. So I could go in here, click up on the name tab, and rename it to employee ID, but there's a much faster way. So I'm going to select the headings and the data beside it, and then on the formulas tab I'm going to click on create from selection, and in this case it's going to say name the cells based on the values in the left. Okay, so what that is going to do is it's going to call B4 employee ID, it's going to call B5 gross pay, it's going to call B6 current interest rate, and it's going to call B7 voluntary pension contribution. I click OK. To double check, I'm going to click in each cell and I'm going to look at the name bar, and I'm going to see and make sure that they have the name in there. It is crucial that you do this for the grader assignment, because otherwise it'll mark practically the whole thing incorrect, because it's looking for named ranges when it's working through those. Okay. Now it says we're going to enter employee ID number 11. We're going to put in a gross pay of $3,000. We're going to put in an interest rate of 4.25%, and we're going to leave the voluntary pension contribution empty. So skill number 4 says I want to do the same thing that I just did here, up here where I called B6, I named it employee ID, and B4 I named employee ID, and B5 I named gross pay, and so on. I want to do the same thing here. So I'm going to select all of these cells, because I want to call A10, I want to be called last name, B10, I want to be called first name, and so on. So select the headings and the field below, go to the formula tab, create from selection, it'll say top row, click OK. So double check, cell A10 should say last name in the name box, cell B10 should say first name, and so on. And do the same thing here. So the same thing for A12 to E13. Create from selection, click OK, and double check. So A13 should be called retirement date, B13, C, D, and E. Okay? All right, so that's skill number 4. Step number 5, we're now going to populate our data. So I want the last name for employee number 11. So if I go back to my lookup table and I come down here to row 11, or to employee 11, I can see that his first name is Amondo, his last name is Pettinelli, there's his phone number and his department and his hiring date and his street address and city and zip and so on and so forth. Okay, so remember what happens with a vertical table lookup. With a vertical table lookup, the first column in the lookup table has to match what you're looking up. So in this case here, I'm looking up employee ID 11. So when I look at my lookup table, I know that my first column must have employee ID in it, because that's the common piece of information that ties what I'm looking for to it. That's how it knows where to find it. For the rest of this, I'm going to have to say, well, the last name, which column is the last name in? So if I go back to the lookup table, I can say there's column 1 is A, column 2 is B, so the last name is in column 3. So write that down. And the next thing it's looking for is the first name. Well, the first name is in column 2, so write that down. So just write them on the instructions, because it'll make it easier as we go along. The department is in column 5. The pension plan that he belongs to is way over here in column 14. The hire date, when he was hired, is in column 6. The birth date, when he was born, here is in column 12. And his current pension value is in column 13. Okay, so again, last name is in 3, first name is in 2, department is 5, pension plan is 14, hire date is 6, birth date is 12, current pension value is in 13. So now I can go and create a whole bunch of VLOOKUP statements to populate that value. So in here I want the last name. So I'm going to go to lookup and reference, VLOOKUP. So the lookup value, what is the common field? Well, that's the employee ID. The table array, and this is why we named the table. The table array, we're going to use the named table employee lookup. Okay, so at this point in time, after you type in the words employee lookup and you hit enter or just type it in, you should see to the right of that field something that says one Candy Fenny, blah, 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 blah. That's telling you that it's recognized the defined name and it's pulling up the correct information. If it doesn't show anything there, then your defined name is incorrect and you'll have to fix it. And I'm going to take you through that in a second. Well, actually, let's take it through it now. So I'm going to go back to the name manager and I'm going to look here and find there's my lookup called employee lookup. All right. If I don't see that, or if it's spelled incorrectly or anything along that line, then if you screwed it up, delete it and rebuild it. It has to be correct. If it's not correct, it's going to cause you all kinds of problems as you go along. So you have to have that one for employee lookup, and it has to have the range of A2 to N, whatever it is, 106, I think. I click on edit, right? So there's my range, A2 to N 103. Notice that they're an absolute reference, which they have to be. So if you messed it up, you have to delete it and recreate it so that it's correct. And you should have another one down below called pension plan lookup that is P2 to Q5 again. Okay, so again, if that one is incorrect, or if you spelled it wrong or whatever, fix that because you need to have that correct. Okay, I'm going to go back and start my VLOOKUP again. So lookup and reference, VLOOKUP. So my common piece of information is my employee ID. My table array is employee lookup. The column index is which, once it's found the employee ID, so once it's found employee 11, which column contains the last name. And in our case, we know that that's 3. And finally, this is an exact match. I have to have an employee 11. If I don't have an employee 11, I want my Excel to tell me that by putting up an error message. So in this case, that has to be false for an exact match. And I hit OK, and I get Patinelli. Now I'm going to do the same for all the rest of these. So I'm just going to type in my VLOOKUP, and the lookup value that I'm looking for is the name. And here's another value of using a defined name. So I hit a comma and I start typing, and as soon as I start typing, defined names show up in my list. So there's my employee lookup, so I'm going to double click on that, comma. We know that the first name was column 2 and false. Alright, so I'm going to do department, so equals V lookup. The value, the field that I'm looking up is the employee ID. I'm looking it up in employee lookup, and the department is in column 5, and again it's false. In other words, false for an exact match. His current pension plan employee lookup, comma. So his current pension plan is in 14 and comma false. His date of hire you have to double click on it, and his date of hire was number 6. Okay, his birth date, and I don't actually have to click on employee ID. I can start typing employee. So there's employee ID, employee lookup, and his, what are we in, birth date? So birth date is in 12. All right. Age we're going to calculate, so we'll come back to that. His retirement date we're going to calculate. His service we're going to calculate. His months till retirement we're going to calculate. And we're going to calculate his pension contribution. We do need his current pension value, so that's my last VLOOKUP. So there's employee ID, comma, employee lookup, comma, current pension value is in 13, and false. Okay, so we have gone through steps 1, 2, 3, and 2, 3, 4, and 5 at this point in time. All right, so now we're going to calculate how old this person is. One of the important things you have to recognize within Excel or anytime you're working with a database is that you never, ever, ever enter a value that you can calculate. So when I set up this employee, the last thing I would want to do is to put in a date, like an age. So this employee is 23, because it's just not going to be true. Tomorrow he's going to be 23 plus 1 day, and the day after that he's going to be 23 plus 2 days, and so on. So if you can calculate a value, then you use the value that you can use to calculate. So by entering the birth date, I can calculate his age, because remember that when Excel stores dates, it stores them as the number of days since January the 1st, 1900. So it's very easy for me to calculate somebody's age simply by taking today's date minus their age, which is going to give you the number of days old they are, and then divide the result by 365.25 to allow for leap years. Okay, so let's do my calculation. Equals, and I need a function, so the today function, bracket, bracket, gives me today's date minus their birth date, okay, and then I'm going to divide that by 365.25. So this person is 43,375 years old. So of course the problem there is that I forgot about bed mass, and I did it on purpose. And this one time I actually honestly did make this mistake on purpose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to put brackets around my first calculation, because what I need to do is I need today's date minus the birth date to give me the number of days old they are, and then divide that by 365.25 to calculate their age. Okay. So Armando is 31.07 days or years old. Okay, so that's step number 6. Step number 7, we're going to calculate the retirement date, and this is where the logic comes into play. All we are doing here is we're calculating. Why do I need his retirement date? Well, I need his retirement date so that I can calculate how many months he has left until he retires. Okay, so his retirement date is going to be 65 days after, and we're going to assume here that people are going to retire on the 65th birthday. And I'm sure I'll have all sorts of issues with people saying, well, they can retire at 60 and so on. That's true, but just for this calculation, we're going to base it on 65. And okay, so what we're going to have to do here, so we're going to say birth date plus 365.25 times 65. So I'm going to go here. So it's going to be equals his birth date plus 365.25 times 65. Okay, and the reason here is because birth date is days. It's a date, so it's stored as a number of days. 65 years old is going to be 65 times 365 to get the number of days. So birth date plus 365 times 65. I do not need brackets on here because BEDMAS is going to do my multiplication first. So it's going to take 365.25 times 65, and then that's the number of days it'll take until he hits his 65th birthday. All right. So this gentleman is going to retire on December the 2nd in the year 2052. Okay. So let's calculate how long he's been an employee. And we don't need this really, but just to kind of reinforce what we do. So to calculate service is exactly the same function or formula that we did on birthday, except we're going to use the hire date instead of the birth date. So I'm going to do equals. Now I'll do my bracket because I know I'm going to need that. Today, bracket. So that's the today function. Remember that a function has to have brackets even if in this particular case there are no arguments. So minus his service date or his hire date, end bracket, and then divide the result by 365.25. So he has 6 years of service. Okay. So now we have to calculate how many months he has left until retirement. And I'm going to kind of come back to why we're doing all of this when we get down to the bottom here. So his months till retirement is going to be at age 65 is going to be his age. Is going to be 65 minus his age times 12. Right? So it's 65. Whoops, I have to put the equal sign in. Equals 65 minus his age, and again, sorry, need the brackets, so equals bracket 65 minus age, right, times 12. Okay, so think of this here. So, and again, if you wanted to know what, how many months you have to retire, well, you're going to say if I'm retiring at 65 and I'm currently 30 years old, well, that's 35 years, and then I have to multiply that by 12 to get months. So he's going to retire in 407.1 months. All right? So 65 minus age, so 65 minus 31 is going to be 34 years, give or take, times 12. So 34 times 12 is 407, give or take. Okay. So those are all of the primary calculations we need. The next part is going to be calculate the monthly pension contribution. So the monthly pension contribution is their gross pay. So this person's gross pay is $3,000, and we did this before. So the contribution is going to be your gross pay times whatever interest rate or whatever contribution rate your pension is based on. Now in this situation, my pension is, we looked it up here and said this gentleman is a member of CAW. So if I go over here and I can see, well, CAW, his pension contribution rate is 8%. All right. So I can now use this in a VLOOKUP and look it up in this other lookup table, the pension lookup, which is right here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a VLOOKUP. And what am I looking up? Well, I'm looking up his current pension plan. Where am I looking it up? Well, I'm looking it up in pension plan lookup, which is here. When I find it, the pension plan is in column 2, and because it's an exact match, it has to be false. All right, so don't worry about the dollar signs at this point in time, but basically that's his pension rate, 8%. But however, to calculate his pension, I have to multiply that 8% times his gross pay to get how much dollars he's going to have. So I'm going to say multiply that by gross pay. So his pay, or his contribution, is $240 a month. But we're not done. And this is the key to make everything else work on here. Once I've got that contribution, there is also this other field up here called voluntary pension contribution. Okay, so if you just think about this, when you joined this company and you became a member of CAW for this particular individual, you were mandated by whatever, by company policy, by the union contract, or however it was set up, to say, as an employee of this company, as an employee, as a part of the CAW pension plan, you have to contribute 8% of your pay each pay period into the pension plan. Okay, so that's the $240 that we have here. However, we're also giving employees the opportunity to top up their pension. And that's what we're going to be doing our calculations for in a second. And to top up your pension, what you're going to be able to do is to make a voluntary pension contribution. So even though this gentleman currently doesn't have one, that doesn't mean he couldn't in the future. So I have to go back up to my formula and I have to add in the voluntary pension contribution. So the number doesn't change, $240, and that's because there is nothing in voluntary pension contribution. But there could be, and that's the key point. Okay, so now we know that this gentleman is going to be paying $240 a month for the next 407 months until he retires at age 65. So now we're going to do a very straightforward future value calculation. So we're going to go to Financial, Future Value, and we've got all the pieces of information that we now need. My interest rate is here. All right, but remember, interest rate, that's an annual interest rate, and we're making monthly contributions. So I must divide that by 12. The number of months, well, we've already calculated that. It's 407 months until he retires. His payment is whatever happens to be in here, which is his mandatory pension contribution plus any voluntary pension contribution he's going to kick in. And his present value, which is what his current pension is worth right now, is right here, 4,000 and whatever. And I click OK. And when this person retires, he will have a pension of $236,000. Now remember, to change it from a negative to a positive, I simply go up to the formula bar and I put a negative sign here. Okay, so now I know that this gentleman's pension at retirement is going to be worth $236,000. So the beauty of done all of this is that now I can go in here and I can say, well, if I'm employee number 23, and everything is done. So all my calculations, so this, any employee in the company can come into you right now and say, how much am I going to get when I retire? And you're simply going to put in here their pay, and everything else is going to work. It's going to go out and pull out all of the information, all their names, salaries, birth dates, calculate their age, calculate retirement date, and so on and so forth. Okay, so if I put in 33, this guy is going to have $345,000 when he retires. I put in 2, he's going to have $500,000 when he retires. If I put in 125, which there is no employee 125, I get a whole bunch of NA errors because there doesn't, employee 125 doesn't exist. So this one spreadsheet now will handle any question that anybody ever has around their pension contribution forever. And that's the beauty of working with VLOOKUP and calculating all of these values. Now, I'm going to go back to employee 11 because that's basically what everything is based on. Let me just step you back a bit. What happened here is that I needed to do this whole spreadsheet was based on the fact of trying to fill in this one field in. So everything I've done here is so that I can get that one value that shows pension value at retirement. Okay, so if I click here, I needed to have all of these pieces of information. Well, the rate was pretty straightforward. We just entered it into cell B6. The number of months till retirement, however, required a fair amount of logic. We had to go back and we say, well, if he was hired on this date, if he was born on this date, then he's going to retire at age 65. So I'm going to take I have to use his birth date to calculate his age. Then I can use his age and 65 to calculate how many years until he retires. And then I multiply that by 12 to get his months till retirement. So to get this one value, I needed to know his age and I needed to know his retirement date. Whoops. And the payment value, I had to know what is he current paying into the pension plan, what could he voluntarily decide to pay into it, and to get that I had to know his pension plan so that I could go and find his pension contribution rate and so on. So a lot of the time when you're working with Excel, you're working backwards. You're saying, what is the end result that I want to have come out? All right, what do I need to have to get to that end result? So in this particular case, I said I need to be able to fill in that future value calculation. So how do I get all of the pieces of information that I need to get me to that? So that's basically how this all came together. Okay, so we're done up to skill 11, or step 11. We're going to now do step 12. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my worksheet. So I'm going to right click on my worksheet. I'm going to click on Move or Copy. I'm going to say Create a Copy and move it to the end. So now I have another worksheet, which is a duplicate of my input worksheet, but I'm going to change the name here to GoalSeek. Okay, so GoalSeek is the second of our what-if analysis tools. So we looked at Scenario Manager last week. This week we're going to look at GoalSeek, and we're going to look at something else called Solver, which we'll come back to in a second. So what GoalSeek allows me to do is to change a formula to get a predefined resolution. Right? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense when I say it that way, but basically what I want to do is I want to be able to say, what if your employee comes to you and says, well, how much do I have to contribute to my pension plan so that I have $350,000 when I retire? So what I could do is I can go up here and I can put in $25. So when I change that to 25, then that is going to change this formula here by adding in that voluntary pension contribution. So in other words, let me go back. This monthly pension contribution was based on the pension that he belongs in, his gross pay, right? So his gross pay times the rate that he's paying. So the VLOOKUP determined that CAW was 8%. Then I multiplied that by his gross pay to get his contribution of $240. But then I also added in this voluntary pension contribution, which at that point was nothing. But I did that so that I could answer questions around how much do I have to pay into it. So I could sit here and say, I want this number down here, my future value, to be 350. Okay, well I can go up here and I can type in, let's take $200. Well, that's way too much. Okay, so $100. Not quite enough. Okay, $110. Closer, $130. A little bit too much, $124. Ooh, that's really close, $125. Oh, so close. All right, $126. Not too much. All right, 125.75. Oh, still too much. Anyway, so you can see what's happening here. Every time I change the number in that voluntary pension contribution, it recalculates the formula. In other words, it says, all right, if he was paying $240 with no voluntary pension contribution, I add $100. Now he's paying $340 each and every month for 400 months. So it calculates that based at 4.25% interest rate to say how much it's going to be. So the important thing here, what GoalSeek allows you to do is let Excel change that voluntary pension contribution. So let me show you how to do it. first thing you do is you click on the cell that you want to have, you want to define the result for. So I want this number here in cell, whatever that is, D16, to be $350,000 exactly. Okay, so I'm going to go to Data, What If Analysis, Goal Seek. So Goal Seek says set cell D16, and again I pointed to it first so that it automatically filled it out, but if I hadn't I could change it to a different cell and so on, but I'm going to leave it at D16. And I want it to be 350,000. Now to get it to be 350,000, in this case the only thing that the employee has the ability to change is his voluntary pension contribution. So basically I'm saying I want my pension at retirement to be exactly $350,000, and I want Excel to do what I had done previously. Just keep changing the number in cell B7 until the future value hits 350,000. So if I click on it, you can see that it says you need to contribute $125.07 per month for that number to be 350,000. Okay, so that is all Goal Seek does. All Goal Seek will do is simply change a number until the result equals what you expect it to be. So the important thing about Goal Seek is that the value that you want to influence, in other words, in this case my pension value at retirement, the cell that you are changing has to contribute directly to that value. Okay, so in this particular case, that future value at pension is based on their monthly contribution. The monthly contribution is based on their pension plan, their gross pay, and their voluntary pension contribution. So most people make the mistake on this one here is when they do the monthly pension contribution, they forget to add in the voluntary pension contribution. And if you don't put the voluntary pension contribution into that function or formula, then Goal Seek won't work. It'll just spin forever and it won't actually do anything. Okay, so just remember that that's basically what Goal Seek does. Okay, now the last thing we're going to deal with is something called Solver. Okay, so Solver, we're going to go back to the input worksheet. We're going to create a copy. So move our copy, create a copy, move it to the end, change the name to Solver. And what Goal Seek allows you to do is it's kind of like what Solver allows you to do is kind of like Goal Seek on steroids. Okay, so Goal Seek will only allow you to change a single value. So in our particular case, the only thing I could change was the voluntary pension contribution. But understand, if he joined a different pension plan, then his contribution would change and his end result would change. If the interest rate was higher, you'd have a different result. If his gross pay was higher, you'd have a different result. So you can change, in our case we only changed one thing, voluntary pension contribution, but technically you could change any of those arguments within the future value calculation. The interest rate, the term, and so on and so forth. Okay, so one of the things you have to be watching out for here, so this is something I should have told you right at the very beginning. So if you go to the Data tab and Solver is not visible on the far right hand side, then you have to install it. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is save your work right now, so that if there's a problem, you'll be okay, that it won't screw it up. But if Solver is not visible right now, you're going to have to click on File, and you're going to have to go down to the very bottom to Options, and you're going to go over here to Add-ins. Okay, and then in Add-ins, you're going to go down to the bottom where it says Manage Excel Add-ins. You're going to click on Go, and you're going to put a tick box in Solver Add-in. All right. Once you do that, you can go back to your Data tab and you'll see Solver over here on the far right. Okay, so once you've done that, click on Solver. And so Solver basically in our situation has the same sort of end result as Goal Seek. So I want D16 And I was playing with this earlier, so that's why you won't have these values showing up in yours. So yours will look like this, like it will look blank. So I want to set my future pension value to a value of $350,000. Now notice I also have options here of max and min. So you would use those for situations like if I want to maximize my profit or I want to minimize my expenses, I would say max or min. Okay, so by changing variable cells, these cells must directly influence that pension contribution. So the two cells that we're going to use are the interest rate. So I'm going to click on the interest rate and I'm going to hit a comma, and my voluntary pension contribution. So those are my two cells that I want Solver to use in the calculation. So where GoalSeek would only allow you to select a single cell, Solver will allow you to select multiple cells. And what it will do is it will change both of those until it reaches the ultimate solution. So the other value to Solver is that it allows you to build constraints. All right. So if I didn't have any constraints, so if I wanted to say make this $350,000 by changing just the interest rate, or by changing interest rate and voluntary pension contribution, but let's face it, I can't have an interest rate of 24% because, but Excel doesn't know that. So I have to build in constraints on these variables so that they don't get out of sync. So I'm going to click subject to the constraints. So I'm going to say the interest rate has got to be less than or equal to, let's see, what did I say here? 0.045. Or, whoops. So the interest rate is going to be constrained to be no more than 4.5%. And I'm going to add a second one, and I'm going to say that the voluntary pension contribution cannot be any greater than $800. All right, so I've selected those two constraints. I can see them here. And then I'm simply going to click on Solve. All right, and it'll come back up and it'll say I've found a solution. So it brought the interest rate up to 4.5%, and the monthly pension contribution dropped actually from 125 or whatever we did before to $104,000. Okay, I'm going to click OK, and that is the assignment. Okay, so this is the only one that I will actually take you through the grader, but I thought it was important to be able to step you through how we created this grader and how, and because this is very much a real life situation that you may or may not, but you probably will see something like this when you start working with an Excel on a long-term basis. So the key takeaway here was to calculate, to determine what I want on my input worksheet. I had to start at the finish and then work my way backwards. So the end result was to be able to calculate this pension value. To get to that, I had to put in all my, so I had to know what was my interest rate. So I entered that in the screen. I had to know months till retirement. Well, to get months till retirement, I have to know which employee I'm dealing with. And once I know which employee I'm dealing with, and then I'm using VLOOKUP to be able to pull all the information that I need, then I can calculate months to retirement because it's 65 minus the age, and so on. And I've gone through all this before, but I think it's just important to reinforce. Okay, all right, well, that's it. So good luck with this one, and if you have any questions,